Carol is 24, standing in her kitchen in 1957, wiping the counter before her husband's boss arrives for dinner. Her apron is starched, her compact sits open by the percolator. Behind her, a stack of bills waits, addressed only to her husband's name. Every gesture looks like habit. It isn't. Number 2 shows she couldn't legally hold a credit card in her name. Number 1 explains why the system existed. Number 12, the apron rule. The apron goes on before the coffee even finishes brewing. Starched strings, tied twice, checked once in the hallway mirror. Household advice of the period was clear. A home should look ready for company at any hour, whether company was coming or not. No one wrote this rule down for Carol specifically. Her mother-in-law noticed it anyway, on the very first visit, glancing past her shoulder into the kitchen before she even said hello. A rumpled kitchen wasn't just untidy, it suggested a wife who wasn't managing. The apron looked like ordinary housework. It was actually a uniform for a job with no schedule, no time clock, and no end of shift. That was the point. Number 11. The lipstick check. Before her husband's car pulls into the driveway, Carol opens the same compact sitting on the counter. A shade close to Revlon's famous Cherries in the Snow, the kind of red every drugstore counter sold that decade to women who wanted to look finished by 5 o'clock. It isn't vanity. Magazines and etiquette columns of the era quietly treated a tired face as a small failure of effort, something a good wife simply corrected before anyone noticed. The click of the compact closing is quiet. The expectation behind it is not. Lipstick wasn't decoration here. It was maintenance, the same way a shined shoe was maintenance, proof that the day hadn't worn her down in front of anyone who mattered. Her face was rehearsed. So was her voice at the door. Number 10. The voice at the door. When the doorbell rings, her tone changes before her expression does. Warm, even, unhurried, the sound etiquette writers like Amy Vanderbilt described as the mark of a genuinely good hostess. Heels click once on the linoleum, a practiced pause before opening, a breath held and released. If she sounded flat or short, even once, neighbors noticed, and neighbors talked over coffee the following week. A wife with a cold voice quickly became a wife. People quietly stopped inviting back. The rule lived nowhere official, no handbook, no printed page. It lived in the room, in every hallway like this one, in every doorway across the block. And even her own name wasn't fully hers to use anymore. Number 9. The envelope problem. The mail sitting on the counter is addressed to Mr. and Mrs., her husband's full name quietly doing the work of both of them. It was standard etiquette practice, taught plainly in Columns and Manners Guides of the Decade. A married woman's correct form of address dropped her own first name entirely, replaced by his. Banks used it. Department stores used it. Wedding invitations and thank you notes used it without a second thought. Carol's own first name existed everywhere in conversation and almost nowhere on paper that mattered. It felt like simple courtesy. It was actually information. A quiet public label announcing exactly whose household this was and who it legally belonged to. That envelope was about to matter more than anyone ever told her. Number 8. The guest list test. The invitation propped on the counter is for her husband's office dinner, printed on heavy cardstock, her own name listed only underneath his in smaller type. Hostessing well at an evening like this wasn't a small favor she offered out of love. It was quietly, unofficially, part of the job description nobody ever handed her in writing. A stiff evening, a slightly burnt roast, an awkward silence at exactly the wrong moment, and it wasn't only embarrassing for one night. It could reflect on a husband standing at the company for months afterward. Her home had become a stage built for someone else's career. The performance was about to move from her parlor into an office building entirely. Number 7. The badge in the drawer. In the back of a kitchen drawer, beneath the recipe cards, sits an old employee badge, a small photo of Carol 2 years younger, working a clerical job downtown before the wedding. She left that job the week she married, not entirely by her own choice. In many offices and school districts of the era, quiet marriage bars ended a woman's employment the moment she said, "I do." No explanation required, no appeal available. Research by economist Claudia Golden found that by the early 1940s, the majority of American school districts refused to hire married women at all, and most fired the ones already employed outright once they married. a pattern that lingered well into the 1950s across teaching and clerical work alike. It wasn't only about teachers and typists. Number 6. The scale behind the wings. A friend of Carol's had applied to become a stewardess the year before her own wedding, drawn in by magazine ads of glamorous women boarding gleaming new planes. What she found instead was a scale in a back office and a clipboard in a supervisor's hand. Airline hiring documents of the era listed exact weight limits, often under 140 pounds depending on height, alongside a strict rule: single only, no children, resign immediately upon marriage or pregnancy. The girdle underneath the uniform had to be tight enough that a supervisor's eye caught nothing loose, nothing out of line. The scale did not care how well she handled a cabin full of nervous passengers at 30,000 feet, or how calmly she had managed an emergency landing drill. Until now, the rules lived in Carol's compact, her kitchen, and her guest list. What came next lived in banks, in ledgers, and in files that outlasted any dinner party. Number 5. The grocery money. Carol keeps a cash envelope system in that same drawer beside the badge, coins counted out carefully for the week, receipts saved for questions that might come up later at dinner. Many households of the period ran on a single account, controlled primarily by the husband, even in homes where the wife managed every single dollar of the weekly budget herself. Running the house well did not mean controlling its money. When she once asked, quietly, about opening something small in her own name, the answer at the local bank branch was a soft, almost apologetic no. The coins in the jar on the counter were hers to count and recount. The account sitting behind them was not quite hers to hold. Number 4. The form that needed a man. At that same bank, weeks later, a loan application sits on the counter with a blank line reading, "Husband's signature required," printed near the bottom. Banking practice through much of the 1950s and 1960s often required a male co-signer for a married woman applying for any credit, regardless of her own income or the couple's actual finances, and a single woman applying a loan frequently needed a father or brother to sign instead. The fluorescent light hums steadily overhead. The rubber stamp sits ready, waiting. Her income was real, documented, and steady. Her name on the form, on its own, was still treated as insufficient. This is where the rule stops living quietly in a handbag and starts living permanently in a filing cabinet. Number 3. The card that wasn't hers. Inside Carol's wallet is a charge card printed with her husband's full name, never her own. The standard format most married women of the era carried for years, without question. Historical accounts confirm that before federal reform arrived in the 1970s, a married woman generally could not hold a credit card issued under her own name, and every single payment she made faithfully built a credit history that belonged, legally, to her husband alone. She could carry the card everywhere. She could sign for every purchase herself. She could pay the bill in full for a decade straight. None of that careful record would ever be hers if she were widowed or divorced tomorrow. The card was hers to use. The credit was not. Number 2. The name on the file. Behind a bank counter somewhere in town, a ledger holds accounts filed under husbands' names by careless default, a heavy filing cabinet drawer rolling shut on a decade of one wife's careful, disciplined budgeting. That practice changed only when the Equal Credit Opportunity Act was signed into law on the 28th of October, 1974, finally making it illegal for lenders to require a spouse's signature or quietly ignore a woman's own income when reviewing an application. For every single year before that date, women exactly like Carol had built entire households, raised children, and paid every bill faithfully, with nothing at all on paper to show for it under their own name. One law explains why every rule before it existed the way it did. Number 1. The conditional independence. Back in the kitchen, the percolator hisses softly on the stove. The apron string is still tied at her waist. The compact sits closed on the counter, and the ring on her finger catches the light from the window. None of it looks different from the beginning of this list. That's exactly the point. The apron, the lipstick, the guest list, the badge hidden in the drawer, the scale behind the wings, the form that needed a man's signature, the card that was never truly hers. None of these were separate, unrelated rules. They were one single rule wearing 12 different disguises, each one dressed up as manners, or beauty, or simple household order. A wife could run an entire household, raise children, manage a family budget down to the penny, host a dinner that made her husband look good in front of his boss, train the woman who replaced her at the office, and still be treated, quietly and officially, as someone whose independence required a second signature before it counted for anything at all. The work was real. The skill behind it was real. The paycheck, on the rare occasions there was one, was real. The future was simply the one part nobody guaranteed her. That expectation was never written down in any handbook anywhere. It didn't need to be. Everyone in the room already knew. Carol is still standing in that kitchen, the percolator hissing softly, the same bills stacked by the phone. The written rules changed, laws passed, forms were rewritten. But the unwritten ones lingered longer, because nobody ever had to defend them out loud. If a name, a card, or an apron string in your family carried a rule like this, tell us below. Subscribe, and meet the next hidden rule together.